Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. Today, two experts, me and White, are going to react to what countries would look like after World War III. I've been recommended to watch the video because there's apparently hot takes. We're going to try not to nitpick it too much.
But this is also the infographics show, and they have like 15 million subscribers, and I think they're like a pretty big like company or whatever, corporation or something along those lines. So I don't feel too bad dunking on them.
You don't feel too bad. Alright, let's get straight into it.
World War III is over. The planet will never be the same.
True.
The southern United States now belongs to Mexico.
Hot take.
Europe is the newest administrative province of Russia. Japan, Taiwan.
Okay, seriously? Russia just takes all of it? They don't even like.
Assuming they can, assuming they're even like able to.
There's no
in the first
government
place
or anything. Makes sense, of course, makes sense.
Taiwan and Australia are all governed by Beijing. Regardless of how World War III starts, it will rewrite the borders of the map, and not always in the ways you might think. We're going to examine a few hypothetical scenarios for World War III and how each would result in the shifting borders across the world. There are some key factors that must be clarified before we get started. One, we can't possibly cover every scenario in this video, but we'll examine some very intriguing
where they got the yachts.
outcomes based on statistical data of the most likely scenarios. Two, we'll assume nuclear weapons are used in moderation, and the war doesn't escalate into
they
a
use
full
nukes in moderation. Okay, that's good. I like that.
full-blown apocalyptic
I like
event.
not
And three, we're basing our
bombs.
extrapolations for the future on the information we have now and how certain
Alright, let's see these countries. I don't see if there's anything
nations and regimes have acted in the past. The only way that a third world war could erupt in the present day is if Russia and China combined forces and went to
Play War Thunder now.
Nice.
Join millions of players across the globe in massive battles on tanks, aircraft, and
war against.
So the only way a world war would erupt is if China and Russia combine forces, not just like Russia attacking the world or China attacking the world?
I guess they'd have to combine forces.
The reason for this is that neither Russia nor China is strong enough to defeat the United States and its allies alone. The reality is, even if they work together,
that's fair
China
enough.
and Russia would likely still struggle to win an all-out war with the West. That being said, there are several scenarios where a Sino-Russian alliance
Let's go to ask them. So they're counting on Serbia, Bulgaria, Montenegro all joining the west side.
Yeah, or
Just Belarus. That's the only country that's not going to join their side. But Malta is going to be on the bad side.
That being said, there are several scenarios where a Sino-Russian alliance could come out on top due to the massive natural resources at their disposal, the enormous size of both militaries, and China's economic stranglehold on many parts of the world. We know that the United States has the most powerful military in the world by far. We also know that NATO, on average, has better weapons and tactics than both Russia and China. However, let's examine what would happen in several different scenarios and how they could possibly result in the shifting of borders in ways we might not expect. The two sides in World War III will be NATO and the Western nations on one side, including their strategic partners and alliances around the world. This would mean that Australia, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, and parts of Latin America would also likely join on this side of the battle. The opposition would be led by China and Russia, which would also include many nations with authoritarian rulers and close ties to Moscow and Beijing. That means North Korea, Belarus, Syria, Iran, and a number of former Soviet bloc states that ally themselves with Russia and China. There's also the possibility that many Latin American and African countries will also throw their lot in with China in particular, the reason for which we'll discuss later on in this video. NATO is made up of 31 countries, most of which are in Europe, except for the United States and Canada. Similar to NATO, but by no means as powerful, is the Collective Security Treaty Organization, which is an alliance between Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, and Tajikistan. The CSTO has a comparable stipulation as Article 5 of the NATO agreement, numbered Article 4, which basically states an attack against one member would be seen as an attack against all members of the alliance.
I guess it wouldn't
So if any of the 6 nations in CSTO is invaded or forced into an all-out war, all other nations will declare war on the aggressor. Now let's look at some World War III scenarios and see how allegiances shift
that's like
and
Soviet
borders will change
Union,
as a result.
like
The first few might
that's
be
like
shocking,
Russia and
as there will be some
friends.
backstabbing between the supposed allies. But as we continue with our analysis, a much more hopeful picture of the world will start to emerge. Unless you're rooting for the authoritarians to win, then you will be sorely disappointed. Scenario 1, Russia's worst nightmare. The war in Ukraine has been raging for more than a year. Putin feels the impending doom on the horizon. He takes drastic actions by launching a tactical nuke at a Ukrainian base.
He does? He does.
He does. Apparently. I mean, he did threaten to in the past.
But you're sure the guy that made the article of assured destruction, mutually assured destruction, is going to launch a nuke? No, sure.
Low-yield nuke detonates, vaporizing
well, I mean, he did threaten to.
Why does he have a chip in his tooth?
Soldiers and vehicles in the
I don't know, maybe actually that's
since the nuclear device is only 25 kilotons, the blast radius is around 0.4 miles or 0.64 kilometers. The damage is not widespread, but it's the very nature of the weapon that elicits a response from NATO. They declare war on Russia and launch aircraft, conventional missiles, and soldiers at key targets across the border. NATO refrains from using nukes as they don't want to escalate things further, but Putin must be dealt with. In response to NATO's invasion, Article 4 of the Collective Security Treaty Organization is initiated. Russia has just over 1 million soldiers between their active members, including those in reserve. However, since the war began, Russia has suffered close to 200,000 casualties. So things are already looking bad.
This video is a bit out of date now, so there's probably like a lot more.
He calls on his closest allies and other authoritarian rulers to aid Russia in their fight against NATO. As once Russia is defeated, the West will spread its influence even further into the Middle East and Asia. But this is a hard sell. The fighting is contained in Eastern Europe and Russia. Many leaders don't want to paint a target on their backs, so they stay out of the conflict. Other than the CSTO countries, Iran decides to...
They just join, knowing they'd lose?
Yeah, I guess.
Iran just thinks, when I join, we'd win.
Yeah, Iran thinks that they're the biggest military
distrust
power
for the
in
West
world.
fuels its decision to escalate the conflict. Syria also joins Russia due to the fact that President Bashar al-Assad is afraid that if Putin loses, he'll lose his main source of weapons to control his own country. But even with aid from these nations, there is one country whose absence cannot be ignored: China. When Russia launched a nuke, even though it was a tactical one, Beijing turned its back on Putin. China has made it very...
Please welcome an absolutely new crossout. A free-to-play multiplayer action game of battles and cool...
Be clear what its stance is.
Yeah, you could get an ad blocker.
Beijing firmly believes that nukes should only ever be used in the defense of one's country and never as an offensive weapon.
True.
Therefore, the nuclear bomb that Putin dropped on Ukraine sealed his fate. China refuses to come to Russia's aid. Now, instead of receiving an influx of weapons and men, China has cut off most support to Moscow. They still buy natural resources from Russia, but refuse to send military aid. In this scenario, NATO forces quickly storm through western Russia and capture Moscow. After a year of fighting in Ukraine and the worsening conditions in the country due to heavy sanctions, the general Russian population doesn't put up much of a fight to keep Putin in power. For many, their leader has failed. The superior tanks, aircraft, and technology of NATO forces allow them to deal with any defense Russia mounts. Vladimir Putin is found dead in the Kremlin with a bullet in his head from what appears to be an assassination carried out by someone in his own government. NATO would also attack any country that allied itself with Russia during the conflict. After the war, they'd have their governments dismantled and reorganized. So, if World War III ended up being Russia fighting against NATO without the help of China, there's no chance they could win a conventional war. Even with allies in this area too, many other countries would remain neutral if China did not back Russia. This includes North Korea, who more than likely would aid Russia, but only if China gave them permission. Given the scenario we just outlined, if Beijing refuses to support Russia, it will likely find North Korea will do the same. After the war is over, Russia would be broken up and new governments would be put into place. There's even a possibility that China would invade Russia from the east if Beijing thought there was a chance Putin would launch more nukes and put the world...
What are these borders? Like, culturally, what are these borders?
Yeah, what?
Are these the Ural Mountains?
That blue area probably has like 3 people.
There's like 4 people
total in it.
There's like 2 cities right here, and that's about it.
Yeah, there's like, I think there's like 1 city down by Kazakhstan.
And China ain't invading. I don't know.
At risk of being obliterated in a nuclear holocaust. In this case, China might lay claim to some of the eastern and northern lands of Russia, as there are huge amounts of natural resources such as fossil fuels and ore in some of these regions. Let's imagine, after Russia is defeated and forced to surrender, that the country is deemed too large to control by one government, and that the stability of the region might be better maintained by splitting Russia up into 8 different countries based on the
one government has controlled it for like...
Look at these borders. This is...
It's better than the other borders.
You're separating them into 8 different countries? Russia's too large for one person to control? Russia's been a sovereign state for like
hundreds of years at this point.
I think that it could be controlled by one person. Well, the problem with doing this, right, is if they make one country, the West can have influence on the entirety of the country. But the provinces over here, those are just going to be completely controlled by China.
Yeah, those are like
now,
Chinese
instead of one giant country, there are 8 smaller ones to manage. Maps of Asia would need to be rewritten with these new borders, and each territory would be given its own name. It's plausible in this scenario that the Far Eastern and Siberian districts would come under the influence.
What are these borders?
Of China. Beijing would set up puppet governments in those new countries that serve their interest by giving them exclusive trade deals and the rights to acquire the natural resources in the region. These nations would also serve as a buffer between China and the now pro-West nations of Western Russia. The new nations to emerge from Russia's Western districts would be led by democratically elected governments. These would obviously be overseen by NATO.
Okay, this area down here is literally just a desert, pretty much.
And would have close ties to Europe and the United States. The borders of Armenia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan would also likely remain the same, but with new governments. The Kaliningrad Oblast, which is currently a part of Russia, would likely be incorporated into Lithuania's borders rather than becoming its own country. There's also the chance that in the chaos, other players in the Middle East might take advantage of the weakened state of anyone who aided Russia. Perhaps Israel would launch an invasion of Syria to eliminate one of the threats surrounding it, secure more resources, and effectively expand its territory almost tenfold. China might take control of Kazakhstan
I wouldn't be surprised.
And the Kyrgyzstan governments and install regimes that would
align
go
back a couple seconds to the Israel-Syria map.
Where?
Effectively
that's Lebanon. That's Lebanon. Lebanon invaded.
China might take control of Kazakhstan and the Kyrgyzstan governments and install regimes that would ally themselves with Beijing. If Russia launched nukes and started World War III without the aid of China, the only boundaries that are likely to change are those of Russia. It would be divided up into several smaller countries that the West and China could more easily control. The Middle East might see some turmoil and some shifts in power, but the borders would likely remain the same. Now let's look at a second scenario. One that'll lead you to a global conflict where every country will need to choose a side. In this second scenario, you'll be shocked at how different
San
the world
Marino's
map
side
looks
really
when it's all
matters
over.
in this conflict.
Scenario 2. China allies itself with Russia and uses its power and influence to pull others into the conflict. World War III is about to break out. The rulers of Russia and China are trying to preserve their very way of life. The West has been encroaching closer and closer, spreading its ideologies and influence.
In Albion, no matter where you go or what
you need to get Nat
you on your journey. Perhaps
you got it.
Beijing has had enough and conducts a secret meeting with the leadership of Moscow. It's decided that if their authoritarian way of doing things is to continue, they need to deal with the United States and its allies. In order to do this, China pulls some strings. Both Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping reach out to other authoritarian rulers around the world and warn that if they don't support Russia and China in the coming conflict, the West will come for them next.
And the West wouldn't just invade them while they're doing this?
I mean, I don't know if they'd have the resources for that.
This allows Russia and China to convince many of the single-party governments and authoritarian rulers across the planet to join their side in World War III, even if they have ties to the West. Many governments in East Asia, Central Africa, and the Middle East ally themselves with China and Russia to ensure they can maintain their power after the war. China also uses its economic might to bend nations to do their will who don't initially...
Let me just go back a little bit, just a little bit. Okay, it makes sense. So Mongolia, literally the country sandwiched in between Russia and China, would join the West.
Yeah, and this map, Tibet is a separate country, but it's still allied with China. That doesn't.
Tibet is a separate country.
And I don't think they like China very much.
In the old Soviet states, they went to win Russia or anything. Yeah, this Switzerland joins the side. I don't know about that. Switzerland doesn't join sides. Switzerland does not join sides. No.
Governments in East Asia, Central Africa, and the Middle East ally themselves with China and Russia to ensure they can maintain their power after the war.
North Pakistan, go back. What's going on in North Pakistan? What is going on?
So bad. Wait, where's the map, guys? Where's the map?
Go back there. Come on.
Where's the map?
All right, just play it.
Out to other authoritarian rulers around the world,
probably
and
yes,
that if
around
they
here.
don't support Russia and China in the coming conflict, the West will come for them next. This allows Russia and China to convince many of the single-party governments and authoritarian rulers across the planet to join their side in World War III, even if they have ties to the West. Many governments in East Asia...
There it is.
What are these two?
What is going on in Pakistan? I know there's like border conflicts there, but like...
There's 2 new countries there.
There's Tibet's just new countries. Yeah, there's just a bunch of new countries there.
Tibet's new. What country is this? This is a country, right?
That's the Republic of the Congo.
Yeah. Right.
Asia, Central Africa, and the Middle East ally themselves with China and Russia to ensure they can maintain their power after the war. China also uses its economic might to bend nations to do their will who don't initially join their side or cause. Much of Latin America is deeply indebted to China. And although the United States still has a major presence in the Americas, Mexico, Venezuela, and Brazil are forced to support China.
Just not
Mexico
would not support. Why would Mexico ever?
There's just too much border pressure. I feel like to do that for them to do that and like, get away with it.
If the only reason they're switching is because
China gives them money,
because of their economic stranglehold with China, America just gives them economic aid.
Yeah,
I mean we still
Brazil
are the biggest economy in the world.
Yeah, Brazil and Venezuela, I could see supporting China, maybe.
I don't know about Brazil.
Well, I mean, Brazil has like a economic thing with China going on.
They have an economic treaty with them. But
or suffer economic collapse. Beijing leverages its Belt and Road Initiative to bring other Latin American countries to its side as well. When all said and done, the desire for authoritarian rulers to stay in power and governments' willingness to do whatever it takes to keep their economies from collapsing, China gathers a lot of support. Resources, weapons, and soldiers pour into the conflict from around the world. Fighting breaks out in the Americas and in Europe. NATO and its allies can't hold off the flood of support for China and Russia. Western powers fall. We know this is an extremely unlikely scenario at this moment in time, but as hyper-nationalism continues to rear its ugly head around the world, and China continues to spread its power and influence by leveraging its economic might, this scenario might not be out of the realm of possibility in the future. Let's look at how this conflict would result in a rewriting of the world map. After the war ended, China would claim all of East Asia as its domain. Beijing may allow
I think they have another video about that.
Them to remain in power, but Japan, the Philippines, and Indonesia would all be reorganized into Chinese territories, or at the very least, have puppet governments put in place that answer to Beijing. Australia could be one of the last holdouts for democracy in the region, but eventually both the continent and New Zealand would be forced to answer to China. South Korea and North Korea would be reunited, with Kim Jong-un as the supreme leader of everyone within his new borders. Obviously, this was not willingly accepted by South Koreans, but China would crush any resistance.
I don't know if Australia and New Zealand would be forced to submit to China.
Indirectly under their control. Mongolia would likely be able to maintain its borders by siding with China and Russia during the war, as it would literally have no choice because of its location. However, any government in Mongolia would be commanded by Beijing. The Middle East would likely keep similar borders as it has today, as long as the governments in this part of the world continuously supply China and Russia with fossil fuels and resources during World War III. The governments in the Middle East would be allowed to continue ruling their respective territories, although Israel would likely be wiped off the face of the
What happened to Greece?
I mean, it's not that bad. This is obviously a liberal interpretation of the
Earth. Governments in the Middle East would be allowed to continue ruling their respective territories, although Israel would likely be wiped off the face of the map, and its territory would be split between Syria, Egypt, and Palestine. The borders of Central Asia would be a little more complicated to predict in this scenario. Pakistan would likely join Russia and China in the war, and would therefore maintain its territory afterward. But what about India? There's been conflicts in the past and even recently along the Himalayan border between India and Chinese-controlled Tibet. China also sees India as a rival in the region and a threat to its power, so it is probable that China and Russia might allow India to remain neutral.
Well, Tibet was its own country for like forever until China.
Even though India has ties to the U.S. and Europe, it is unlikely that the Indian government would
support
them
Tibet kind of wants to be its own
staying out of the
country. I
conflict
feel like there is.
altogether was an option. Perhaps when the dust settles, India will be broken up into 3 new regions. The northern section will become part of China, the west part of Pakistan, and the south could remain its own nation.
Okay, so India is just getting
controlled by Beijing. Bangladesh then might be consolidated into one of the regions or gifted to Myanmar for their support during World War III. Europe would be
Myanmar,
completely
take
decimated by
Bangladesh.
World War III. There's pretty much no country on the continent that would get out of the conflict unscathed. If Russia, China, and their allies
could
won the
think of a lot.
conflict, Finland, Sweden, and Norway...
I don't know
would all
exactly what Andorra would do.
Send you 40 million. Yes.
Guys, a Nigerian has to send you 40 million.
How
be
many ads did
incorporated
they
into
put in
Russian
this
borders.
video?
They would no longer have any sovereignty,
This is
and Moscow
not
would rule
okay.
them with an iron fist.
This is
Same would go
unacceptable.
for Estonia, Latvia, and
The
Lithuania.
mid-rolls.
Obviously, Putin would finally get his wish of incorporating
Gross,
Ukraine into
recreating the
Russian
Soviet
borders.
Union.
It's possible that
Yeah.
Belarus would remain a
We all
sovereign
know how
nation,
well that went
as it
last
would heavily ally itself with Russia from the beginning. But in reality, Alexander Lukashenko does whatever Putin says anyway. Any nation that was a former part of the Soviet Union would likely become a part of the Russian Empire once again. But what about the rest of Europe? Germany might be able to maintain its borders as long as it gives in to every single one of Russia's demands. A puppet government could be put in place, but a deal might be made since Germany currently relies heavily on Russian fossil fuels. About 35% of Germany's fossil fuels come from Russia, which results in Berlin spending billions of euros on Russian energy supplies each year. There may be a way for the German government to convince Russia to let them stay in power in exchange for continued purchasing of their gas and oil. Of course, this government would pretty much be owned by Putin.
Germany
but
has
country
like the
itself may not be
entirety of
dissolved.
Europe,
rest
the
of
West
continental
behind
Europe
them.
might not be so lucky.
I don't feel
it could
like-
be consolidated and turned into the European Communist
Okay,
Federation.
France got invaded.
Okay.
What?
I just want to point something out. Why are they becoming communist again?
Yeah, Russia doesn't like communism.
Wait,
I
what?
don't
Wait,
anymore.
just play that back.
Be owned by Putin, but the country itself may not be dissolved. The rest of continental Europe might not be so lucky. It could be consolidated and turned into the European Communist Federation.
The rest of Europe would just get invaded, and nobody would intervene.
The
Nobody would.
European Communist Organization? Why are they communist? Why are they communist? Is China like spreading their ideals? I don't.
Is China involved in this war? Are they the ones invading Europe?
Why are they communist? I think bro still
What?
thinks Russia's communist. I think the infographic says doesn't know that Russia's not communist anymore. They might be a bit out of date.
Yeah, this video might be.
Each country is no longer a sovereign entity, but a state with a single nation, ruled by one of Putin's closest and most trusted allies. Perhaps the new capital of this country would be in Switzerland, as it would be located near the center of the new communist state. Switzerland might even...
Okay, yeah, Switzerland would be in the capital just because it's the center. Yeah, that's that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because every country's capital is like exactly the same.
Don't do like a really like modernized city or anything. Do the same.
Don't do like a big city. Don't do like Istanbul or London or anything like.
No. Just
some. Do like Bern. Do like some random small town in Switzerland.
Make it a really hard place to reach. That's in the kind of the middle of the Alps in Switzerland, so that's kind of right in the middle. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's like right in the center. Because every country
neutral in the
does
initial
that.
conflict.
Yeah.
But as soon as Russian troops and allies conquer Europe, even Switzerland would not be spared. The United Kingdom would be too dangerous for Russia to leave as its own entity.
I think most of Europe.
Russia's not just gonna invade Switzerland because they can't. Switzerland's
they don't.
Impenetrable. You'd have to send 1 million men just to like take out like 100,000.
Yeah, and besides that's not how wars work. Countries just don't invade other countries just because they can.
Yeah, it's just
there's usually some like gain for them.
Expending resources.
To Russia and China would need to be put in power, or the UK would be incorporated into the newly formed European Communist Federation. The borders of the Americas would also shift after World War III if Russia and China won. Canada would likely maintain its borders, and the government there might not even be tampered with. Both Russia and China would need to keep Canada in check. But after its 70,000 active troops, 4 submarines, and 63 fighter jets were destroyed during the war, Moscow and Beijing have little to worry about when it comes to Canada. The United States, on the other hand, would be completely dismantled. Russia would take back Alaska and incorporate it into its eastern
They're not going to take that little part. They don't want that part.
They don't want
territory. When World War III broke out, Mexico could have been swayed to join China due to its growing economic ties to Beijing. Mexico would never do anything to anger its neighbor to the
U.S.
north.
just isn't doing anything.
They'd be protected. But as U.S. forces were sent abroad to fight in the Pacific and Europe, its military at home weakened. In this scenario,
they sent so many forces that Mexico's military, that's like 20 times worse than America's, won.
Like
Mexico could
the Mexican military that can't even secure their own country.
They didn't have it. They didn't have a coast guard. They didn't
sending supplies and resources to China. When the fighting stopped, Mexico would agree to maintain positive diplomatic ties with Beijing in return.
Okay.
They just took territory.
All of California, all of Texas, all of everything.
That's their old territory. Yeah,
Turn for the land taken.
Mexican Empire.
In World War II, didn't Hitler say that they could have their old territory back if they joined his side?
Hitler probably said that. I
don't think they accepted that.
From them by the United States during the Intervención Estadounidense in Mexico, or Mexican War. This means that parts of at least 9 states would now belong to Mexico. China might then set up an overseas territory in the northwestern section of the United States controlled by Beijing.
How do you think they're going to control that?
Well, the East Coast was divided into smaller territories that Russia could manage.
Okay,
Russia would be one of the more difficult regions for Moscow and Beijing to keep under control. So perhaps the northeastern and central U.S. would be able to remain a sovereign nation, but with harsh restrictions placed on the size of the military, similar to how Allied forces treated Japan after World War II. The southeastern coast of the U.S.
If they manage to get that far, I don't know if the Midwest is going to remain a sovereign nation.
This is just going to be an uprising.
Cuba, which would almost certainly back Russia and China in World War III. The administrative center for this new Cuban nation would be located in Havana, but communist forces from around the world would need to be deployed to Florida and the surrounding states to ensure no uprisings emerged. Cuba would also likely expand. New Cuban nation would be located in Havana, but
Wow. The capital of Cuba is in Havana?
Wow.
Communist forces from around the world would need to be deployed to Florida and the surrounding states to ensure no uprisings emerged. Cuba would also likely expand its borders with the aid of Russia to incorporate
you don't know Floridians,
including Puerto Rico and Haiti. Then there's the matter of countries that formally recognize Taiwan as a sovereign nation. If China comes out a victor in World War III, Taiwan will be reincorporated into its borders. Any nation that had formal diplomatic relations with the Taiwanese government would be punished for their insolence. Belize and Guatemala.
Oh yeah, they're just gonna. Yeah, they're just gonna punish half the nation.
Or perhaps the authoritarian rule of Daniel Ortega and Nicaragua would be extended to the rest of Central America, including countries that were previously.
Join large-scale battles with military vehicles.
War Thunder.
Action game War Thunder has received a major update.
Bro, how many
too close to the United States, such as Costa Rica.
I don't know.
In South America, the borders wouldn't shift as much as many of the countries there were already under the economic control of China to begin with. These countries most likely stayed out of the war. But places like Brazil, which exports huge quantities of soy to China, and Chile, which sends copper and iron ore across the Pacific, might gain special support in the region.
Cannot make up his mind.
On the other hand, would likely be gifted to one of the other countries as it formally recognizes Taiwan. It's possible that...
This is hurting me, dude. This is hurting me. Oh, okay, no, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine.
It's fine.
It's fine.
We have to take our guided meditation break in the middle of the video.
There had to be something they had to change.
Brazil would take control of Paraguay and bring it into its own borders, which already contains around 50%
Brazil would take it,
America,
not like Bolivia or Argentina.
Population, and 60% of South America's economic output. The borders of Africa would probably remain similar to what they were before the start of World War III. However, some leaders might try to take advantage of the turmoil in the world and invade neighboring territories for their resources. Others might take the opportunity to launch larger battles over disputed land. However, there would likely be no major border shifts as a direct result of the fighting between NATO and its allies against China, Russia, and its allies. Although it's possible that Africa could see an explosion of manufacturing and trade after World War III ends as Russia and China look for more places to procure resources and cheap labor to help rebuild their battle-worn countries and to maintain control of their new empires. So, resource-rich nations like Nigeria, which hold around 25% of the continent's petroleum, and South Africa, which mines $125 billion in mineral resources each year, could gain even more power and influence.
So they're not going to just invade these countries because they have actual reasons to. They're only going to invade the countries that recognize Taiwan.
Yeah.
Region. These nations will likely form even closer ties to the victors of World War III, which would lead to their dominance in the region. We cannot be exactly sure what the aftermath of World War III will look like. If Russia and China and their allies win, Western democracies will likely be dismantled and authoritarian regimes put in place across the world. Seems that this would set the world up for future conflicts, as authoritarian leaders aren't really known for getting along with each other. However, we likely won't have to worry about this.
Isn't this the Prime Minister The UK?
Leaders aren't really known for getting along with each other. However, we likely won't have
and that's the old prime. Is that the old prime minister of the UK?
The next one we're about to discuss.
Rishi
Scenario
Sunak.
3: NATO and its allies go to war and win. As things stand right now, the United States has the most powerful military in the world. Therefore, by extension, NATO has the most powerful military in the world. Even if China and Russia could manage to convince several other countries to join them in their fight against the West, it's still unlikely they'd be able to win. The combined might of NATO nations would overwhelm both the Russian and Chinese militaries. For one thing, Russia can't even defeat the Ukrainian military, which is much smaller and has revealed numerous inadequacies in Russia's military, equipment, and leadership. China would be a more formidable foe, but like Russia, a lot of its vessels and armament are outdated. What we will say is that China is rapidly modernizing its military and spending massive amounts of money on creating state-of-the-art weapons. So in the future, China could be a huge threat to the West, but it's not quite there yet. Let's now look at how the borders of the world would be redrawn in this scenario. Like the first World War III scenario, Russia would likely be divided up into different parts after the war ended. The country is 6.602 million square miles, or 10.624 million square kilometers, which is absolutely massive when compared to any other country. Canada, the second largest nation in terms of land mass, is only 3.855 million square miles, or 6.604 million square kilometers, making it only a little more than half the size of Russia. Again, the country itself could be broken up into its 8 federal districts, and a new government could be established in each one. However, since China would also be on the losing side of the war, Western nations would be solely responsible for helping to establish functioning governments that are elected by the people. The last thing anyone would want after World War III is a unified Russia building up its strength again and starting another global conflict in the future. The danger here is that a divided Russia controlled by the West might cause flashbacks for much of the world during which the European colonization was at its height. There is the...
What?
Divided Russia will cause flashbacks for the world.
Because of European
colonization was at its height?
Russia's part of Europe.
I'm trying to think about this. Let's see. What do you get?
This is like word salad. Like this is a word burger. Like none of these words go together.
Russia's got a book called European colonization. Just open it.
What does flashbacks even mean?
Flashbacks are you getting?
This flat.
Oh god, this video is so. It's so well made.
The possibility that the Russian borders would not change, but instead a new government would be set up in Moscow to help transition the entire country into a more democratic form of government. But like so many armies have found out before, conquering Russia and its people is a somewhat impossible feat. Even with a new democratic government in Moscow, there would still be groups.
What are the 2 countries that they were using as examples of conquering Russia?
I think like.
Was Scotland one of them?
But like so many armies,
no, that was like just their uniforms.
Conquering Russia and its people is
okay. I don't think anybody ever dressed like that.
I remember the Great Scottish Invasion of
It's a somewhat impossible feat.
If they're trying to do some other country
in Moscow, there would still be groups of rebels that would continue to fight against the new government
and
their Western ideals for decades to come. Even after NATO won World War III, the Russian frontier could become a lawless place. There might be generals or other Russian leaders who could rally large numbers of people together to fight back against the westernization of their former homeland. This could lead to fluid borders that are set up by different factions vying for control of the country. Therefore, NATO and its allies...
Okay, maybe I can see this. All the land to the left of the Ural Mountains are controlled. And then they just kind of leave.
May only focus on rebuilding and reorganizing.
I could see like Karelia or whatever.
Perhaps a line will be drawn somewhere just to the east of Moscow. To the west of this border, a new European-style series of countries.
Just to the east. Okay.
And states will form that are organized similarly to the democratic republics of Europe. To the east of the border will be a wild frontier, where warlords fight one another to claim dominance and power. In this chaotic post-World War III part of the world, there would be too much disorder and fighting for any one group to gain
7 people living there.
Eastern Russia in a state of constant flux, meaning this part of the country will never be able to grow powerful enough to threaten the world again. Then there is the matter of China. China is a large country.
This will be interesting. Like, how do you deal with China? There's 2 billion people in there. It's like the most bloodiest wars in history have been Chinese civil wars. So like,
yeah.
around 3.7 million square miles or 6 million square kilometers, but it's the nation's population size that'll serve as the real problem when trying to organize this part of the world into a new set of countries with stable governments. China has just over 1.4 billion people within its borders. That is practically all 1.4 billion Chinese citizens that have been brainwashed to see Western ideologies as being evil. In order to create a functional government or a series of governments to lead China after World War III, the territory might need to be broken up into several parts. There will also need to be a transitionary government. War III. The territory might need to be broken up into...
Okay, so there's like 1 billion people living here.
Like 3 people live in the light blue area.
3 people live in here.
And 3 people live in...
400 million there. Yeah.
Several parts. There will also need to be a transitionary government where democratic elections can be held and the brainwashing of the Chinese people by President Xi Jinping and his regime can be broken, splitting China up into several smaller nations and being sensitive to the ethnic identities of people in those regions.
Those borders are not sensitive to the ethnic identities at all.
But you are not being
might help rebuild East Asia after World War
III. These borders are
not sensitive to the ethnic identities independence and be able to govern itself. Taiwan would become a truly sovereign nation without needing to fear being invaded by China. Then there would be different sections that could be separated, even though a mix of different ethnicities are present. Mongolia can be shifted to include northern China, where there's already a large Mongolian population.
Just give that to Mongolia.
Western China could become its own nation or be incorporated into the newly reformed Kazakhstan, where a new government based on democratic elections will be established following the war.
I don't know, man.
Central and Eastern China
they wouldn't
make
just make it its own nation
for a truly democratic
There's a lot of protests for it to be its own nation already.
The government in Beijing could oversee this region. Obviously, the authoritarian rule of the Chinese Communist Party would need to be removed. Perhaps a Chinese democracy could be established with multiple parties representing the needs and wants of people instead of the desires of the dictator. North Korea would be reunited with South Korea and the Kim dynasty would come to an end. The government in Seoul would welcome representatives from the north and the Korean people would once again be unified, but under a democracy rather than a harsh authoritarian ruler. There would be huge amounts of humanitarian aid sent to Korea to help with the transition of North Koreans into a society where they actually have a say in the laws being made and don't need to live in fear for their lives every day. However, this would be true for many parts of the world. If World War III ends with NATO and its allies dismantling the authoritarian regimes in Russia, China, and any country that joined them in their fight, other dictatorships could collapse soon after. Once news traveled around the world that oppressive regimes had lost and democratic ideologies were being implemented in newly formed countries where Russia and China once were, popular uprisings could begin across the planet. Countries in the Middle East could see revolutions to overthrow outdated and oppressive ideas and give every ethnicity and gender more rights. Countries in Central Africa would go through revolutions where people take back their power. Latin American countries that once embraced the ideals of the Soviet Union and authoritarianism could find their populations demanding more freedom and fair elections. The borders in these parts of the world probably won't change much, but the governments and systems might become much more centered around democracy. The Ukraine would finally be free from Russian invasion forces, and the Crimean Peninsula would be returned to its borders. Belarus would either be forced to install a new government or be incorporated into the newly formed Western Russia, which would have its capital in St. Petersburg. A lot of what comes out of World War III is the dismantling of countries on the losing side that were too big or had too much power. If Russia and China won the war, the United States and Europe would be broken apart and either incorporated into other territories or given new authoritarian governments to oversee their populations. If NATO and the Western nations won the war, Russia and China would be broken apart into smaller territories, and new democratic governments would be installed to govern the populations within their borders. For the most part, Africa, South America, and the South Pacific probably wouldn't see their borders shift much unless local conflicts escalated as a result of the chaos caused by World War III. It's impossible to tell exactly what the world would look like after a global conflict, but there would definitely be changes to the world map. That being said, if nuclear war erupted as a result of World War III, then much of the Northern Hemisphere would be obliterated by nuclear war. The landscape would become irradiated and pocked with craters.
Fallout in real life
would cease to exist as there would be a mass exodus of anyone who is still alive to more rural areas. At that point, nationality wouldn't matter. Soon after the bombs exploded and missiles stopped falling, the smoke, soot, and debris kicked up by the nuclear explosions would begin blocking the sun. It would spread to the southern hemisphere, making the entire planet all but
it'd be like Fallout in real life.
So, if World War III results in nuclear war, we can just forget about any borders or governments, as the human species as a whole would struggle to survive. Now watch U.S. World War III plan. Or check out countries that'll be destroyed because of World War III.
Oh my god!
Yeah.
Apparently.
I told you to take Broadway, this always happens.
Really bad part of this thing that we missed.
It's Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan.
Borders back here.
At the very beginning.
Revisit it real quick.
So you've heard.
So I've heard. I'm sifting through the data right now.
Is it that?
I don't know, where is this? That's nice. I don't know, but they just made Ukraine look like a blob, which makes sense for them. It really does. Well,
yeah,
this video, maybe not too realistic.
But there's not. It's not totally awful.
The first scenario was good. Well, I mean, it was kind of good. The second one, I don't know.
I don't have any words for the second one.
The third one, it could be good if you made the borders a little bit better.
And yeah, the third one kind of would make sense.
Kind of, yeah, kind of. Great video, infographic show. Thanks for watching, guys.
Thanks for watching, y'all.